So as Kate mentioned at the introduction, and as I said at the very start of Mass, today's the feast of the Ascension of Jesus. It's a really important feast, and I'm not really going to talk about it today. So if you'd like to get a homily on the Ascension, you could go back in the YouTube channel, in our St Declan's YouTube channel, back to last year, and you'll get a homily on the Ascension. What I wanted to do today, see, the task of the homily is to unpack the liturgy of the Word, which is the scriptures that we've just heard. So absolutely could and perhaps should be preaching on the Ascension, but what I want to do today is still drawing upon the Gospel, pick up the last part of our definition as a parish of missionary discipleship. So I'm just going to ask Sonia, could you just go click? Beautiful. This is our definition of missionary discipleship that we came up with here in the parish. Now the term missionary discipleship, just to remind you, comes from Pope Francis. He puts those two words, we usually think of those two words as separate. It's like the idea is everybody's supposed to be a disciple and some people are missionaries. Pope Francis says, no, we're all called to be missionary disciples. So the definition that we came up with in the parish some years ago was this, that a missionary disciple is someone whose friendship with Jesus ignites a desire to follow him completely and share the love of God with others. So this is the fourth week in a row where we've been talking about this at Mass. So on the very first week, I focused on friendship with Jesus. Then the second week, I focused on the igniting a desire part of the definition. Then last week, we focused on following him completely. That leaves one final bit for today, which is to share the love of God with others. And immediately it ties us into the gospel for today. The gospel today, Jesus, in his final words before he ascends into heaven, says, here is what's come to be called the Great Commission, to go make disciples of all the nations. It's the great words of Jesus, his last words, to tell us this is what he wants us to do. So we're called, and this also is the missionary part of our definition. The first part of it is about being a follower of Jesus, a disciple. Being a missionary is about sharing the love of God with others. We describe our mission very carefully like that, ties in with our little mission statement, which is that we're to bring the love of God to life in others. So what's it mean to share the love of God with others? I want to suggest three things, three ways in which we do that, okay? The first of those is what we might call evangelization. And that's where we share with somebody who doesn't yet know the love of God, hasn't encountered the person of Jesus. We share with them the good news that God loves them so much that he sent his only son Jesus to die for us and he was also raised to bring us into a new life with him. Now, you might immediately at this point be thinking, I really hope that's somebody else's job. I'd really like that to be somebody else's task. And of course, there's something challenging about it. There can be something inside of us that thinks, I don't want to impose my beliefs on somebody. I don't want to force somebody to believe what I believe. And we don't think that that's what Catholic evangelization looks like either. But to share what we have received is when we are invited to propose the reason for the hope that we have tasted something of the love of God, that we've experienced something of God's love ourselves, and we want others to experience it. The image I really like to use here is from Singing in the Rain. You might have heard me use this metaphor before. So the musical Singing in the Rain, the title song, the guys just spent the night chatting to the girl. It was a more innocent kind of time. He spent the night talking to her. He's fallen in love, and as he walks down the street in the early hours of the morning, past the late night revelers who are perhaps doing the walk of shame home, he starts singing that he's singing in the rain as the rain starts to fall, and Gene Kelly does the dance with the umbrella as he walks down the street. Why is he so cheerful? Why is he so excited? Why does he not care that others would see that? It's because he's in love. And love looks a little foolish sometimes, but you want to share it. It's of the nature of it. If you've ever, is there anything more annoying than a bestie who's just fallen in love, right? They just go on and on about the person that they've fallen. Well, that's all evangelization is, right? It's sharing the love that we've received. The final thing I just want to say about evangelization is that here in the parish, we've tried to make that really easy for us to do as a parish through the use of Alpha. Alpha is a program, it's a tool that helps, it makes it easy because you don't have to say, can I talk to you and really work through all the difficult questions and themes and topics that people, you can say, look, here's a great course that explores really important questions about what it means to be a person of faith from the perspective of, what's life really all about from the perspective of Christian faith. It's a great introduction to what it means to be a Christian. So that's part one of what it means to share the love of God with others. It's part of being a missionary disciple. Equally as important is what in our mission plan as a parish and drawing upon the language and tradition of the church we call works of mercy. This is the recognition that Jesus had a preferential love, a deep care for those who were poor, suffering or hurting. We've talked about the end of the gospel today where he gets up and says, go make disciples. At the very beginning of his gospel, he says, I've been anointed by the Spirit to bring good news to the poor. And so the works of mercy are the ways in which we reach out to and care for those who are hurting or suffering, those who are in pain of some sort, those who've been deprived of what we take for granted as the necessary things for life. We do that in all sorts of ways. We can do that as individuals. We do it when we ask for financial contributions to various Catholic charities and other great causes. We're about to start a ministry here in the parish where we're going to work with people who are leaving prison and need to be just reconnected into the life of the community of Australian society, but also, please God, into the life of faith as well. We're just about to start that ministry in the coming months. So there are different ways that we can do that. I think there are more ways that we can do that, but I think it's a really important part of sharing the love of God with others. What we're saying there is that we see Jesus loving the poor in the Gospels. We want to do that too. I could have given you a whole bunch of other examples of ways that this happens in the parish. Another great example will be when people go and visit the sick, okay, when the visitation ministers. That's a beautiful work of mercy. There are lots of others, but that's the second area. The third area we could call different things. We might call it addressing systemic injustice. We could call it being faithful to the church's social teaching. But what it encompasses is a bunch of different things that involve the way in which we as a community of faith, again, following the example of Jesus, taking our cue from him, want to allow his love, as it said in the second reading today, to fill all of creation. It's one way of thinking about this is it's really important to care for the person who is sleeping rough, who doesn't have enough to eat. That's a crucial thing for us to be doing as Christians. It's equally crucial for us as Christians to be saying, why is it that that person doesn't have enough to eat? What is it in our society that means that there's a big chunk of our population that are hungry or don't have a roof over their heads? And to do something about that, to address the systemic causes, the systemic issues that produce those sorts of situations. That's not to stop seeing people as people. We want to care for that person who's hungry, who needs a blanket, who needs a place to stay. But we also want to see if we can work towards a better society where those sorts of problems aren't there in the way that they're there now. Another dimension, there is so much, we could do homily and homily after the riches of the church's social teaching. But one that I wanted to finish on and focus upon this morning is, you can see in our little focus here at the altar, it's what's sometimes called the stewardship of creation, or in Pope Francis's words, care for our common home. It's the recognition that our Christian faith requires us to care for the world that God has made. This is not kind of like a greeny lefty agenda when we as Christians say that we're supposed to be the good stewards of creation, okay? It's got nothing to do with party politics. It's actually following the example of Jesus. It's listening to what God teaches us in the scriptures when he says to us, when he talks to Adam, he says, you're to look after, you're to steward creation, to look after the world that God has made. The reality, of course, is that we have not done that. The reality, of course, is that all of our natural resources are under incredible pressure from the actions of human beings. And so it's really important that we understand that part of sharing the love of God with others, one way of thinking about that is when it comes to the stewardship of creation, is to say, well, let's make sure we share the love of God with others who haven't been born yet, or our children who grow up in an environment that's polluted, or in a place that's actually suffering extreme weather situations, extreme flooding, extreme drought, and so on. And let's do what we can as Christians, and from the place of our Christian faith, to care for our common home. This is actually an act of love for one another. It's actually an act of love for one another. It's to recognise that our care and our love should be as large-hearted as Jesus's, who loves each and every human being and the world which they live in. We want to create and care for our common home in such a way that people can flourish and not be harmed. So, 3 ways in which we're to share the love of God with others. In sharing the gospel, talking to people about the gift and good news of Jesus. Fundamentally, that's about how we live our lives, that we will be a witness of the joy that God gives us. Secondly, it's about a care for the poor, the works of mercy. And thirdly, it's about what I've said there, I've put under the rubric of Catholic social teaching, and I gave you just a couple of examples addressing instances of systemic injustice and care for our common home. Is there more that could be said? Is the mission or the call to be a missionary bigger than that? Yeah, it is. There's much more we could say. There's lots more examples we could give. But these are ones that I think that we can maybe quickly and in a short space of time wrap our heads around and understand that the call to follow Jesus is not just about our relationship with him, it's also about, it gets practically expressed in the way that we share the love of God with others. My invitation and challenge to us as a parish is to commit to those 3 things. Some of you will be drawn and feel more attracted to one of those areas than another. That's great because it takes all of us to make it happen. But I want you to recognise that each of these are important, each of these matter to God, each of these are expressive of the love that God has for all people and the entirety of creation. As we celebrate Eucharist then together this morning, let's ask the Lord to really put it on our hearts, that we might be sharers of the love of God in the way that God wants us to be with those that we meet.